The ground moved wrong. That was the first thing Dax Heller noticed when he stepped off the Colonial shuttle onto Karath IV. Not the heat, which was extraordinary. Not the red ochre dust that coated his boots inside of 3 seconds. But the way the earth under his feet gave a faint, almost intimate shudder. The way a sleeping animal might shift when it senses something watching it. He stood at the edge of the landing pad with his bag over one shoulder and looked down at his own boots and felt it again. A soft, rhythmic pulse, like a second heartbeat buried 10 meters below him. He'd felt that before. On Pallas Lus, on the ridge stations above Meridian Colony. Once, memorably, on a research platform off the coast of New Svalbard, just before the platform went sideways into the sea. He'd felt it, and he'd lived each time. And he felt it now, and decided to say nothing about it to the 2 Colonial Authority handlers who were walking toward him across the pad in matching gray field jackets that had never seen actual field use. Mr. Heller, the taller one, extended a hand. Director Voss, this is Agent Pren. Dax shook the hand. It was dry and precise. Just Dax. Of course. Voss smiled in a way that involved only the front of his face. We're grateful you made the trip. We understand you're the best available specialist for subterrestrial predator contacts in the outer colonies. I'm the only specialist, Dax said. There's a difference. He let them walk him through the compound gates. The settlement was mid-sized, maybe 800 civilian residents, research facility, a power station, an animal refuge that serviced the native megafauna. Red rock country in every direction, broken by ravines and dry riverbeds, and, every few kilometers, one of the prefab watchtowers that the authority had put up 2 seasons ago when the disappearances started. He cataloged all of it, without appearing to look at any of it. It was a habit he'd kept alive for 23 years, and it had kept him breathing through all of them. How many contacts so far? He asked. Confirmed kills, 12 colonists, Pren said. She was shorter than Voss, and carried a data pad she kept glancing at as if it had answers on it. Survey teams, a geological crew, a couple at the Northern Refuge who were. She stopped. The remains were largely absent. Largely. It's a thorough feeder, Voss said. Dax stopped walking and looked at the ground again. The pulse was gone now. Or, he'd stopped being able to feel it through the compound's reinforced deck plates. Have your people found any physical remains of the creature itself? Castings, sheddings, bone fragments, any fossils in the geological surveys? Pren scrolled her pad. Actually, yes. A survey team found what appeared to be a fossilized specimen approximately 60 kilometers northeast of the settlement, 2 weeks before the first disappearance. The paleontologists who found it were the first victims. Dax looked at her. You have images of the fossil? She passed him the pad. He studied the image for a long time. Creature in it was large, very large, and configured in a way that didn't match anything in the authority's known xenofauna database. He happened to have memorized because it was his job, and also because he was, on his worst days, a deeply strange person. The skull structure was wrong for the standard Kethra taxonomy. The jaw articulation was different. The limb attachments were absent. It had no limbs. What it had instead were 3 long, whip-like appendages that the geological compression had preserved in mid-extension, each one terminating in a complex barbed cluster that looked, from the right angle, almost delicate. This isn't a standard Kethra, he said. I beg your pardon, Voss said. The Kethra, the subterrestrial predator species, that's been documented on 11 other colony worlds. That's what you called me about, isn't it? What your file describes. He handed the pad back to Pren. This isn't one. Or rather, it's related. It's something else. A regional variant, maybe. A different evolutionary branch. The appendage structure is unique. The Kethra I've dealt with have 2 strike tongs. This one had 3. Voss and Pren exchanged a look. It was the kind of look that meant they'd known something, and hadn't told him. We may have additional information, Voss said carefully. We can share once you're fully briefed. Dax picked up his bag again. You can start sharing it now, Director. I'm a quick study. He wasn't given everything. He never was. But he was given enough to understand that what was happening under Karath IV was not a single creature, feeding event, but a breeding cycle. That the Kethra variant, which he began calling the Queen strain in his field notes, because he needed to call it something, and it was the only designation that felt accurate. laid a clutch of mobile sub-eggs that hatched into smaller, faster, airborne variants that served the breeding cycle as scouts and defenders. That those smaller variants, which the authorities' xenobiologists had been calling Type B contacts, were capable of short-range flight, possessed a volatile biological propellant that made them both fast and extremely dangerous when killed incorrectly, and had been, apparently, primary source of the colonist fatalities so far. He was also given a weapons loadout that was, to put it charitably, inadequate. Your standard issue sidearm, 2 long rifles, a case of meridian pattern fragmentation grenades. Pren read off the inventory list. Dax looked at the case, then he looked at her. The authority has specific regulations regarding personal arms in active colony zones, Voss said. For sure you understand. I understand, Dax said, that a meridian fragmentation grenade against a subterrestrial predator that moves at 40 kilometers per hour through solid rock is approximately as useful as throwing my boot at it. You'll have support from our ground team. I'd like to speak with the civilian settlement coordinator before I go out. That's been arranged, Doctor. Nara Solande runs the animal refuge on the settlement's east perimeter. She's familiar with the local terrain and biology. She may be useful to you. He noticed the pause before useful. He filed it away. He met her that evening in the refuge, which smelled of native herbivore and recycled coolant, and something floral he couldn't identify. She was measuring feed portions with one hand and reading a specimen report with the other, and she did not look up immediately when he came in. He appreciated, because people who looked up immediately were usually expecting something from him, and he was already running low on things to give. Dr. Solande? A moment. She finished her notes, set the report down, and looked up at him with the direct, slightly impatient expression of someone who solved practical problems for a living and found the interruption of that work to be the universe's primary flaw. You're the specialist they flew in. Dax Heller Nara. She didn't shake hands. You've reviewed the contact reports? Everything they gave me. Everything they gave you. She repeated, with an emphasis on gave that told him she knew about the information they hadn't. Come on, I'll show you the perimeter. He walked the perimeter with her as the sun dropped below the ridgeline and the sky went the dark, amber red of a dying fire. She showed him the places where the ground had been disturbed, long furrows in the earth, radiating out from a central point, not unlike the frost-heave cracks he'd seen in polar colony excavations, except that frost-heave didn't leave, parallel scoring consistent with a barbed biological appendage. She showed him the refuge's outermost fence. Something had hit it from underground, bowing the posts outward. She showed him a dry stream, where the sediment was disturbed to a depth of 3 meters in a path that curved northeast. It came close, he said. 2 nights ago. She crouched and pressed 2 fingers into the disturbed sediment. My daughter was in the east enclosure with 2 of the refuge workers. I had them sleep in the main building after that. Your daughter. Amma, she's 8. She helps me with the subadult specimens. She stood. I'm not going to pretend. I'm not frightened, Mr. Heller, because I think you probably need accurate information more than you need me to seem calm. He looked at her. That's the most useful thing anyone said to me since I landed. She almost smiled. Then the bar is very low. He was back at the compound when he found the young man waiting by his assigned quarters. He was leaning against the wall with his arms folded, and a camera unit hanging from his neck, and a look on his face that Dax associated with people who were either about to ask him for something or about to tell him something they'd been working up to for a long time. He looked about 26. He had Dax's nose. Dax noticed that immediately because he'd spent 23 years cataloging things, and then told himself he was projecting, and then looked again and thought, no, that's my nose. You'd be the cameraman they mentioned, Dax said. Ren Welk pushed off the wall and offered his hand. I'm here to document the contact event. For the public record. They told you about me? They mentioned a camera operator. Dax shook his hand. It was a good grip, too eager. You have field experience? Some. Been on 3 colonial operations. Meridian, Palace, and the Tarsus Fungal Bloom event. Dax stopped. The Tarsus Fungal Bloom. Yeah, that was a Class 4 biohazard event. They didn't send camera crews into that. Ren held his gaze for a beat too long. No, they didn't. Dax unlocked his quarters. Get some sleep. We go out at first light. He lay in the dark for an hour after that and did not sleep and thought about Florida of all the irrelevant things. A concert. A laughing woman whose name he'd known for exactly one night. The way the heat had felt different there. Wet and close and alive in a way that Kareth Fi's heat was not. He'd been 31 years old and catastrophically irresponsible, and he had thought, just once, about going back. He had not gone back. He told himself it was a coincidence. He told himself this very firmly in the dark, and did not believe it even slightly. They went out at first light in a ground vehicle, with Voss's two-man support team, a taciturn man named Cray, and a younger one named Dreyer, who handled his rifle like he was hoping he wouldn't have to use it. Nara came as the terrain consultant. Ren came with his camera and said nothing for the first 40 minutes, which Dax found tolerable, and then began asking questions, which Dax found less so, and then asked the right question, which Dax grudgingly answered. "How do you know where to look for them?" Ren asked. "They hunt by vibration, ground-conducted sound. Anything that moves on the surface sends a signal downward that they can read at range. The bigger the creature, the louder the signal." He watched the terrain as the vehicle moved. "We're looking for secondary signs, ground subsidence, disturbed root systems. Animal behavior changes. The local megafauna will avoid areas where a Kethera is active. They don't know why they avoid it. They just do. How do you know all this? Same way you know anything. I stood next to people who were wrong about it, and then I was wrong about it. Myself, and then I stopped being wrong." Ren was quiet for a moment. Then, "That sounds like something my mother used to say." Dax said nothing. The cave system was northeast, 62 kilometers out, in a ravine system that cut through the ochre rock like something had dragged a blade across it. The rock walls were old, very old, and covered in places with cave paintings that were older still, geometric patterns and animal forms that planet's pre-contact inhabitants had left behind. 1,000 years before the colonial surveys arrived, some of the paintings showed something that might have been the Kethera. Long and sinuous and underground, with reaching appendages, and small figures of people above it who were running. Dax looked at the paintings for a long time. "They knew," Nara said quietly beside him. "They always know," he said. "The settlements that survive long enough, they always know. The ones that don't," he turned away from the paintings, "stay close." He killed the first Type B contact in the cave at range, which was the correct way to kill it, because a Kethera Type B's biological propellant reacts violently to kinetic impact at close range. What he was not expecting was the way Dreyer, Voss's man, reacted to the corpse, not with the standard defensive crouch but with sudden, very specific attention to the creature's body cavity and a handheld scanner that he brought out from his jacket in a practiced motion that suggested he'd done it before. "What are you scanning for?" Dax asked. Dreyer startled. "Radiation signature, standard protocol. It's a biological life form, there's no—" Dax stopped. He looked at Dreyer. He looked at Cray, who was standing further back in the cave, and who was, he now noticed, not watching the cave entrance but watching Dax. "Where are the eggs?" "I don't know what you—" "The Type B contacts are the juvenile phase of the breeding cycle. They don't exist independently. Eggs seem somewhere in this cave system. You came in here with scanners and you knew what you were looking for." Dreyer's hand moved toward his sidearm. Dax moved faster, not to his weapon but 2 steps sideways between Dreyer and Nara, grabbed Ren's arm and pulled him away from Cray's line of sight. "Director Voss wants the eggs," Dax said. It wasn't a question. "The authority has a research interest," Cray said from behind him. His voice was flat and professional. "Alive specimens. The weapons applications are significant." "The weapons applications," Dax said, "are that you put one of these in a sealed environment, it breeds, and you've got no environment left in 6 months." That's a very conservative assessment. That's a very accurate one. What happened next was fast and not entirely in Dax's favor. Cray was faster than he looked. Cave wall behind Dax was closer than he'd accounted for, and the stun charge, which hit him between the shoulder blades, chopped him to the cave floor with the kind of efficiency that suggested it had been planned. He came back to consciousness in a cage. It was a standard colonial wildlife containment unit, portable, rated for large megafauna, very solid. It was sitting in a dry clearing about 2 kilometers from the cave entrance. In the full weight of the Kareth IV afternoon sun was not merciful. His weapons were gone, his field kit was gone. His water flask, his personal flask, which had survived Palace 2 in Meridian, and the Tarsus fungal bloom, was lying in the dust just outside the cage bars, in the specific location that suggested it had been placed there deliberately. He was very thirsty. He had 3 bars of signal on his communicator, which the authorities' people had apparently missed, and which he chose not to use immediately, because if they noticed it, they'd come back and take it. He lay in the shade that the cage bars provided, which was not much shade, inventory of what he had, and what he did not have, and what he was going to do about the gap between those 2 things. After an hour, a large native predator, one of the tawny quadrupeds that Nara's refuge managed, about 180 kilograms, magnificent and absolutely certain of its own primacy in this clearing, ambled in from the southern scrub and regarded him with an expression of supreme territorial assessment. "Go away," Dax said. The creature yawned. Its teeth were very long. "I'm serious." It sat down approximately 2 meters from the cage and began grooming itself. It was not afraid of him. It had decided to tolerate him, time being, because he was contained, and therefore not an immediate problem, and it was a hot afternoon, and the clearing had shade. Later it pawed at the cage bars twice, and urinated on his boots through the gap. 23 years of colonial contact experience, Dax thought, and he was being urinated on by an alien cat. He closed his eyes and breathed through it and thought, Ren will come. If Ren is half what I think he might be, he'll come, That was the first time he let himself think it directly, and he held onto it with the same grip he'd have held a handhold on a cliff face and waited. Ren came the next morning. He came on foot, alone, having apparently walked the 2 kilometers from the cave, while the authorities' people were occupied with loading eggs, and he had the presence of mind to bring tools. Not the right tools, but that was fine. Tools in capable hands beat right tools in incapable ones. He had a pry bar and Dax's water flask, and a datapad with the compound's emergency frequency loaded. He said nothing when he found Dax. He just handed the flask through the bars first. Dax drank. Then he said, "The lock mechanism is on the left side. There's a manual release under the primary latch if you push the secondary housing up first." "I know. I tested one of these when I was on Meridian." Ren was already at the lock. His hands moved with that particular quality of attention that Dax associated with people who'd learned to work under pressure from someone who, under pressure. "Give me a minute." The lock came apart in 50 seconds. They walked. The ground vehicle was dead. Cray had pulled a component, nothing obvious, and finding it would have taken an hour they didn't have. So they walked, through the red afternoon, through terrain that vibrated, in ways Dax could feel through his boot soles. And he monitored the vibrations, and did not say anything about them to Ren because Ren was still breathing at a rate that suggested controlled fear, and controlled fear was the kind Dax could work with. "You know what Voss and Cray did with the eggs?" Ren asked after a while. "They'll try to move them off-planet. They'll fail. The Queen Strain will track them. She'll come to the settlement before they can get airborne." "How do you know it's a she?" Dax looked at him. "I don't. It's easier to think of the things I'm going to kill as having a specific identity. It makes the decision feel less like a fact of nature, and more like a choice." He watched the ground. "Your mother was at the concert in Florida." Ren didn't break stride. "Yeah, you could have led with that. I was going to, on the shuttle in." A long pause. "Then I saw your face when you looked at me, and I figured you'd already started adding it up. I thought I'd let you get there." Dax said nothing for 3 full minutes, and Ren, to his considerable credit, did not fill the silence. "I would have been a bad father," Dax said finally. "I want to be honest about that. I know. Mom told me." Another pause. "She also told me you were the best in the field and that if I've ever found something bad underground, I should call you so." He looked sideways. "Here I am." Dax thought about that for a long time, about the specific and uncanny logic of a woman who'd said both of those things to the same person and meant both of them. "She sounds like someone I remember. She says the same about you. Also that you were reckless and annoying. She's not wrong." They were within sight of the settlement perimeter when the ground opened behind them, not in front. Behind, which meant the Queen Strain. had already triangulated their movement pattern and understood approach corridors well enough to attempt a flanking maneuver, which was a level of tactical cognition Dax had not attributed to the species based on prior contact data, and which he filed, in the back of his mind, under the heading of things to revise urgently if he survived. The settlement alarms were already going. Through the gate and across the compound, he could see Nara's refuge workers moving, and he could see Nara herself at the refuge entrance with a long-reach weapon of some kind. Local manufacture, not authority standard, and the small figure of a child behind her that he understood was Amma, and the whole scene had the quality of a situation that had been deteriorating without him for approximately 12 hours. He shouted for Nara as they came through the gate. She crossed to him at a run, with the particular urgency of someone who has been waiting for a specific person to arrive, so they can transfer a specific terrible piece of information. The little girl, she said. Amma. She found an egg in the south enclosure 2 days ago. She's been hiding it. She didn't understand what it was. She thought it was a specimen. She thought I'd want it. Where is she? The village structures, eastern sector. She went there when the alarm started. Baruti went after her. And the egg. Nara's face. She took it with her. There was the tactical situation. A queen strain tracking an egg through a settlement full of civilians, with no proper weapons, no authority support. One man who knew what he was doing. One man who was learning. And a community that had survived here long enough to know these hills and these storms, and this red ochre earth in ways that no colonial survey had bothered to document. Dax had, in his experience, started from worse positions. He was not able, immediately, to remember when, but he was committed to the assertion. The eastern sector of the settlement was a cluster of older structures built before the Ori grid arrived. Lower to the ground, thick-walled, made of the same red rock as the surrounding terrain. Baruti had the child in the innermost room, and the egg wrapped in a thermal blanket in the corner when Dax and Ren came through the door. Baruti was a large man with the specific stillness of someone who had decided he would not move from this spot regardless of what arrived, and Dax felt, in that moment, the particular respect he reserved for people who held ground they hadn't been trained to hold. The settlement shook. Not the subtle subsurface pulse he'd felt when he arrived. This was the queen strain at 15 meters, full movement speed. And the walls groaned with it, and the ceiling fixtures swung, and Amma held the thermal blanketed egg against her chest with arms, eyes wide but not crying, which told him everything about her mother. "Give me the egg," Ren said, crouching to Amma's level. She looked at him. She'd looked at the egg. Her face did the calculation that 8-year-olds do faster, and more honestly than adults. She handed it to him. Dax was already at the window reading the ground. The queen strain's movement path was readable in the subsidence cracks spreading out from the settlement's eastern fence. She was circling, not charging, which meant she was aware of the egg's location, and was containing rather than pursuing, an intelligent predator that understood containment. The revised threat assessment continued to be significantly worse than the original. The thunderstorm, Nara said. She'd come in behind them, quiet enough that he hadn't heard her. It comes every afternoon, like clockwork. The temperature differential between the highland and the lowland drives a convective cycle. The storm tracks right through this part of the settlement. She paused. The ground conductors. The authority put grounding infrastructure throughout the settlement. Lightning dissipators, rated for direct strikes. They run down through the bedrock. Dax turned slowly. If the main dissipator array were triggered with a manual overload, she said, and a conductor were laid at ground level across the storm track, something the storm's ground current would follow. The queen strain would surface at the point of maximum ground current, Dax said. If she were chasing something at that point, yes. He looked at her for a long moment. She was watching him, with the expression of someone who'd run the calculation, before she started talking and already knew the answer. "How long until the storm?" he asked. 40 minutes, maybe 35. "What do you need?" "The maintenance shed on the compound's northwest corner has the override equipment, and I need something to lay, a conductive strip, heavy gauge. It'll have to be done by hand across the storm track." "I'll lay it," Ren said. Dax looked at him. "I know how grounding systems work." I rewired a crashed survey shuttle's power coupling on Meridian in the middle of a biohazard event. I can lay a ground strip. Dax thought about what he knew, and what he'd inferred and what he was going to say. Then he said, with the particular compression of a man who'd spent 23 years, saying only what was essential. Don't get the egg close to the strip when it's live. She'll track it. Bring it to the storm track only when I tell you. And in the meantime, keep moving. She's tracking vibration. Steady movement, rhythmic. She'll model it as a non-threat, a large animal walking, and hold containment rather than striking. He put his hand briefly on Ren's shoulder. Predictable movement patterns are safe. Erratic ones are not. Don't be erratic. I've been told that my whole life, Ren said. He went. The next 30 minutes were the most technically demanding of Dax's career, which was saying something considerable. He and Nara worked the maintenance shed with one functional power tool and 2 pairs of hands, and an understanding of the settlement's electrical infrastructure that she'd built up over 4 years of keeping the refuge running when the authorities' maintenance teams were delayed, which was most of the time. She pulled the override panel with the precision of someone who'd studied it without ever expecting to use it this way. He configured the dissipator array to hold charge rather than bleed it, a reversal of its entire design purpose, and felt the faint wrongness of that, the specific discomfort of taking a safety system and turning it into a weapon. This will damage the infrastructure, he said. Yes, the authority will want compensation. The authority, she said, without looking up from the panel, can want many things. The shed window, he could see Ren. He was moving in the wide loop he'd described, steady, unhurried, laying the conductive strip from a reel he'd found in the shed's storage. He was good at it. He moved like someone comfortable in bad situations, was either learned or inherited, and Dax refused right now to examine which. The Queen Strain's subsidence cracks tracked him at distance, pacing him, not closing. Holding containment, the sky was going dark in the northwest. Not sunset dark, storm dark. The specific bruised purple-green of a convective front moving fast and low, mace, lit from inside by the lightning that Kareth Foy's afternoon differential produced every day with the regularity of a clock. The temperature dropped 4 degrees in the space of 2 minutes. The wind picked up, and with it came the smell of ozone and hot stone. 3 minutes, Nara said. Dax keyed his communicator. Ren, move to the storm track, center of the strip. A pause. Then moving. Queen Strain's subsidence cracks shifted. She'd felt the change in vibration pattern. She was recalculating. Now, Nara said. Dax hit the override. The dissipator array inverted with a sound like something fundamental being reversed. Deep electrical groan that the Dax felt in his back teeth. Every ground conductor in the settlement's eastern sector charged at once. The conductive strip Ren had laid, lit up, invisible to the eye, but there in the electromagnetic sense, path of least resistance through stone and dust, and 20 meters of alien earth. The Queen Strain hit it from below. She surfaced because she had to. The ground current was intolerable at depth, was frying the sensory organs she used to navigate, and she came up the way a creature comes up, when it has no other choice. Fast, and enormous, and wrong, in the way that things are wrong when they've evolved in complete darkness for 1,000,000 years and find themselves, suddenly, in the open. She was large. Much larger than the fossils had suggested, which meant the fossil had been a juvenile. 3 strike appendages extended as she breached, fanning out to a span of 20 meters, each one terminating in that delicate barbed cluster. Her body was smooth and dark, and she moved like a cable under tension. Everything powerful and nothing wasted. First lightning bolt hit the strip. The current followed the path Nara had designed for it, down through the stone, and the Queen Strain was in that path. And what happened to her in the next 2 seconds was something Dax had no accurate vocabulary for, because nothing in the xenofaunal literature had ever described of a creature that size being struck by that much current. She convulsed. She screamed. Not a sound exactly, but a vibration that the ground conducted upward, and that every human within 400 meters felt in their knees. The egg. The egg was still in Ren's hands, and the Queen Strain's remaining cognition, whatever wasn't being burned away by the current, reached for the egg the way dying things reach for the last thing they care about, and she drove her strike appendage toward him. The second bolt hit. It hit the appendage directly at full extension, and the current jumped from the appendage through the queen strain's entire body, and the queen strain, this creature that had evolved in the deep stone of this world for 1,000,000 years, this creature that had no frame of reference for electricity as a weapon, because nothing in her evolutionary history had ever wielded it, stopped. Just stopped, the whole system of her. The vast, dark body, the 3 appendages, the sensory array that had tracked vibrations through solid rock for 1 kilometer, in every direction. All of it stopped. The egg fell. Ren caught it. He was on his knees in the red dust, having apparently gone to his knees at some point in the last few seconds, and he caught the egg with both arms pressed against his chest. And he held it, and then he looked up at Dax. He was shaking. His hands were shaking, and his jaw was tight with the effort of controlling it, the way a young man controls shaking when he doesn't want to be seen shaking. Dax walked to him, crouched down, and he took the egg from him and set it on the ground. Then he put his hand on the back of Ren's head, briefly. The way you steady something that's been through a hard stop. Good, he said. Just that. Ren let out a breath that had been held too long. T brought Amma from the structures, and she went straight to her mother, wrapping both arms around Nara's waist. And Nara held her daughter's head against her chest and looked at Dax over the top of it, with an expression he recognized from every colony world he'd ever stood on in the aftermath of something terrible. The expression of someone who had held on long enough and was now cautiously considering the possibility of letting go. It took 2 days to clear the settlement perimeter. Type B contacts remained in the cave system, 3 nests which Dax and Ren cleared with the help of Nara's refuge team and the authority pilot who turned out to have been alive in the Kethra's digestive tract and escaped by the method of absolute furious refusal to stop shooting. Dax cataloged as one of the more extraordinary pieces of human stubbornness he'd ever documented. The pilot, name of Den, with a grin that seemed physiologically incapable of dimming, flew them back to the cave in a vehicle he should not by any rational standard have been able to fly, and destroyed the remaining nest with the attitude of a man completing a routine job that had run slightly long. Voss and Cray were found at the northern landing pad with the egg container and a dead transport vehicle. The queen strain had tracked them, predictably, and the eggs they'd been trying to move had cracked in transit from the ground current. And they were sitting on the pad looking at each other with the specific expression of men whose plan had failed. In every particular, Dax turned them over to the settlement's civilian authority and did not spend additional time on them. On the 3rd day, Dax was sitting on the edge of the landing pad in the early morning, before the heat built, with a cup of something Nara's kitchen had produced that approximated coffee without quite achieving it, watching the red light come up over the ridgeline. Ren sat down next to him. He had his camera around his neck and he was not filming. "You're staying on?" Dax said. "For now. Nara needs documentation of the site for the remediation report. The authority's going to try to minimize what happened here, and she needs a clear record." A pause. "You're going?" "There's a contract on Vesper Station. Different species, different threat category. They called me 6 weeks ago, and I put them off." "You always moving?" Dax thought about it. "Mostly. It suits the work. Does it suit you?" He considered the question seriously, because it deserved to be considered seriously, and because the young man asking it had a right to an honest answer. Less than it used to. Ren turned his cup in both hands. Below them, the settlement was beginning its morning. Refuge workers in the enclosures. The maintenance team starting on the damaged infrastructure. The sound of Amma's voice somewhere nearby in a register that suggested she had found something interesting and was explaining it to someone at length. The red light touched the ridgeline and spread downward, and the ochre dust turned, the color of something almost warm. "I'm not asking to come with you," Ren said carefully. "I'm aware that's a significant ask, and you've had about 72 hours to adjust to the concept of me existing, which isn't much time." Dax said nothing. "I'm just saying." Ren looked at the ridgeline. "There's a gremlin situation on Fresno Colony they've been trying to classify. I've been reading the contact reports. Whatever it is, it's underground, it's fast, and the local team has no idea what they're dealing with. Fresno Colony is 11 months from here by standard transit, I know." Dax was quiet for a long time. The light moved. The settlement sounds built around them, ordinary and alive. The sound of people continuing in the aftermath of things that had tried to stop them. "Coffee here is terrible," he said finally. "It really is. Fresno Colony probably has better coffee." Ren glanced at him. Dax didn't look back. He drank his terrible coffee and watched the light come down the rock face and thought about 23 years of moving and the specific, uncanny logic of a woman who'd told her son to find him if things got bad underground. As if she'd known, from the very beginning, that they would, and that he would need someone there, and that the someone would need to be exactly this. "The shuttle leaves at 1400, Dax said. "I know," Ren said. "I already booked a seat." Dax looked at him. Ren was not quite hiding a smile that Dax recognized because he'd worn it himself, 30 years ago, before the work had compressed it into something smaller and more sustainable. He thought about telling him that. He thought about a lot of things. He let them settle into the warm red morning and the bad coffee and the sound of a child's voice explaining something to the world and did not speak, because some things were better held than said. At least for now. At least for the length of a shuttle trip to Fresno Colony, which was long enough to begin. The ground beneath them was still. First time since he'd landed on Karath IV, the ground was entirely, completely still. He finished his coffee. He picked up his bag. He walked toward the compound to collect his field kit and his weapons case, and the single personal effect, the flask, that had survived everything. And behind him, he heard Ren get to his feet, and heard the particular footfall of someone who was learning to match a pace they hadn't known. Until 3 days ago, they were built to match. They had a shuttle to catch. There were 11 known colony worlds with active subterrestrial predator contacts. 12, now once Fresno Colony was classified. Humanity had been wrong about the underground before, had assumed it was empty, had assumed the depth meant safety, had built on top of things that moved in the dark, and fed on vibration, and had no frame of reference for creatures that would wire a settlement's own grounding system backward and wait for lightning. They were learning. The creatures in the deep were learning too, probably. Somewhere in the evolutionary calculus of the species that hunted from below, there would eventually be an adaptation, a way to account for the thing that happened on Karath IV, for the reversal of safety systems, the deliberate wielding of a storm. Life found ways. Life always found ways. But so did the other thing. The thing that landed on strange worlds and named itself a specialist, and said, "I've been wrong about it before," and then got less wrong. The thing that was annoying and reckless and kept a flask from Palace Thesund as a personal effect. The thing that walked away from a dead cage in red dust, with a young man who had his nose and his stubbornness and his particular inability to leave, problem unfinished. The shuttle lifted at 1400, right on schedule, and banked northeast over the Red Rock country, and below it, the settlement went on with its ordinary, continuing, alive sounds, and the ochre dust settled back down over the clearing where the cage had been, and the ground was still, and the sky was clear, and on the ridgeline the tawny quadruped that had peed on Dax Heller's boots sat in the morning sun and watched the shuttle go, utterly indifferent, supreme in its territory, and very much alive. As was everyone else. That, in the end, was the whole of it.